Looking for some companionship, he stopped at the local animal shelter and was immediately drawn to an older feral bear. His calm presence and warm amber eyes immediately drew him in. The man's name was Jonah Keller, a 42-year-old mechanic who'd lived alone in the small Montana town of Fair Hollow ever since his wife passed 5 years ago. He hadn't planned on bringing anyone home, let alone a bear, but something about the creature struck a chord deep inside him. There was a gravity to the bear's eyes, a quiet patience, like he'd seen too much and stopped expecting anything. The shelter workers called the bear Oscar. They didn't know much about him, only that he'd been found wandering near the outskirts of a burned-down hunting cabin and had shown no aggression despite his size. No one wanted to take him in, and technically he was supposed to be transferred to a sanctuary, but paperwork delays had kept him there. Jonah signed every form they gave him. He didn't hesitate. He'd built a reinforced shed out back years ago, intended for a project he never finished. It would be Oscar's space now. He just wanted to give the old bear a place to feel safe, maybe for the first time in his life. The next morning, Jonah loaded Oscar into a trailer and drove him home. The ride was silent, except for the occasional low grunt from the back. Oscar didn't pace. He didn't panic. He just watched. That calmness unsettled Jonah more than any thrashing would have. He wondered what kind of life the bear had lived to be this still. Once home, Oscar stepped into the enclosure like he belonged there. He sniffed the corners, padded around, then curled up in the hay without fuss. Jonah sat by the fence for hours that first night, just watching him breathe. 3 days later, Jonah took him to the local vet for a full checkup. The vet, Dr. Hank Maddox, was an old friend of Jonah's. He joked when he saw them arrive. "You sure you want to be a bear dad now?" Jonah chuckled, but didn't answer. It didn't feel like a joke. Inside the exam room, Oscar stood surprisingly still. Dr. Maddox gently examined him, murmuring quietly as he checked vitals, scanned tags, and drew blood. At one point, the vet's smile faded. His eyes lingered on something under Oscar's thick neck fur. He stepped away, pressed a few buttons on his computer, then turned slowly. "Jonah," he said, his voice low, "I'm sorry, but you can't keep this bear." Jonah's chest tightened. He didn't understand. "What do you mean?" he asked, keeping his voice calm. "I filled out everything. He's mine now." Dr. Maddox hesitated. "He shouldn't have been available for adoption. I need to make a call. Please don't leave." Jonah didn't wait. His instincts kicked in. Without another word, he stepped forward, clipped the leash back onto Oscar's harness, and walked him out. The vet didn't try to stop him, just called out once, but Jonah didn't turn around. He got Oscar back into the trailer and drove away, heart pounding. In the rearview mirror, he saw a staff member rush outside, phone pressed to her ear. He didn't need to guess who she was calling. The road back home was lined with pines, golden under the afternoon sun, but Jonah's mind was a storm. By the time he neared Fair Hollow, he saw flashing lights outside his house. 2 police cars idled quietly, waiting. He didn't go home. Instead, he took a sharp turn and drove out past the town line, heading into the forest trails he knew by heart. About 5 miles in, he pulled off-road and followed a gravel path that twisted up toward a long-abandoned fire lookout. The structure was still standing, barely. Jonah parked the truck and opened the trailer. Oscar lumbered out, calm as ever. They didn't speak, of course, but Jonah murmured to him anyway, "Guess we're camping for a while." That night was quiet, except for the wind and distant owls. Jonah sat beside the bear, who laid down near the edge of the trees. Despite everything, he felt a strange calm. He didn't know why the vet had said what he did, but he wasn't going to let them take Oscar without an answer. Over the next 2 days, he lived off the grid. He rationed the supplies he'd brought and only went into town once, under cover of darkness, to gather more food. Oscar remained quiet, never trying to run, never showing distress. Jonah grew more convinced that whatever was going on had nothing to do with the bear's health. It had to be something else. He drove to a different town 70 miles away, Cold Creek, where nobody knew him, and found a small wildlife clinic. It sat behind a bait shop and didn't even have a sign. Inside, the vet, a younger man named Dr. Lang, listened carefully as Jonah explained things. When Dr. Lang examined Oscar, he said what Jonah already knew. He's healthy, very healthy for a bear his age. No illness, no injuries, just old. Jonah asked him to make a call to the Fair Hollow Clinic. Dr. Lang hesitated but agreed. He stepped outside to make the call, while Jonah stayed in the exam room with Oscar. The wait felt endless. When Lang returned, his face was pale. "I don't know what this is," he said carefully, "but the moment I mentioned Oscar, they shut down, told me not to get involved. That was it." Jonah's gut twisted. Something bigger was going on. But what? What made this bear so special? As he stood to leave, Lang stopped him. "Be careful," he said. "I mean it." Jonah nodded, thanked him, and walked out. He didn't notice until he got to his truck that the back door had been locked. Panic flared. Then he heard the sirens. They came fast. 3 black SUVs unmarked, no town logos. Men in vests jumped out, guns drawn. Jonah froze. Someone yanked him from the door. He didn't resist. Oscar stayed still, unmoving in the trailer, eyes watching everything. In minutes, Jonah was cuffed, seated in a cold vehicle, and driven away. He wasn't taken to the local station. Instead, they brought him to a federal wildlife holding facility. The kind he'd only heard about in stories. Steel walls, no windows, cold rooms and quiet halls. Hours passed before anyone spoke to him. Then the door opened, and in walked Dr. Maddox, his old friend. Not smiling now. "You should have waited, Jonah." "For what?" Jonah demanded. "To be told I couldn't keep the only thing in my life that doesn't feel empty?" Maddox sat down. "This isn't about you, it's about Oscar." "Then, tell me the truth." The vet sighed. "Oscar isn't just a bear. He's part of something complicated." "That's not an answer," Maddox hesitated. "He was part of a federal breeding program, one designed to save a genetic line from extinction. He disappeared from the facility last year during a fire. We assumed he died." Jonah's breath caught. "You're telling me he escaped?" Maddox nodded. "Yes, and until now no one knew where he went. We kept it quiet to avoid press backlash. We didn't expect him to turn up at a shelter." Jonah sat back, stunned. "You mean he's some kind of priceless bear?" "To the government, yes. He's the last of his genetic line. The others were lost. That's why I said you couldn't keep him." Jonah stared at the wall. "He's not just a case file," he said softly. "He's good. He's calm. He listens." Maddox nodded again. "I know. That's what made him different." Silence settled between them. Then Maddox said, "The program's ending. They can't afford to keep him. They were going to move him to a lab, but after everything you did, after seeing how he responded to you, they're reconsidering." Jonah blinked. "What does that mean?" "It means they might let you keep him, officially, with conditions." It took another week for it to be finalized. Jonah was allowed to return home, and Oscar was transferred with him, this time under a federal agreement that required regular vet visits, safety inspections, and a reinforced enclosure. The government even paid for the upgrades. Jonah didn't care about the rules. He just wanted Oscar back. Standing in the enclosure again, Oscar stepped out of the transport trailer and sniffed the air. He turned to Jonah and huffed, a deep, soft sound, and Jonah smiled for the first time in weeks. The town of Fair Hollow had mixed reactions. Some thought he was crazy. Others came by just to see the bear. But none of that mattered to Jonah. He had someone to come home to now. Someone who didn't speak, didn't judge, just existed beside him with quiet presence. Over time, Jonah learned that companionship didn't always come from the familiar. Sometimes it came in the form of a massive bear with amber eyes and a past too tangled to explain. Oscar had been taken, hidden, passed around, lost, and found again. And in Jonah, he'd found peace. In Oscar, Jonah had found purpose. The world didn't make sense most days. But in that little cabin on the edge of the woods, with the soft thump of paws against hay and the low, content huff of breath, Jonah felt something he hadn't felt in years: home. The first night Oscar slept in his rebuilt enclosure, Jonah barely slept at all. He kept checking the camera feed, listening for any sign of distress. But the bear didn't pace or whine. He just curled into the hay and breathed slowly, like he'd finally allowed himself to rest. At sunrise, Jonah brought out a bucket of food, berries, fish, boiled eggs, and a bit of honey, and sat outside the fence as Oscar ate. They didn't need words. That had always been the thing. Their understanding ran deeper. Jonah had built a bench outside the enclosure. Every morning, coffee in hand, he sat there and just watched. Sometimes Oscar would come to the edge, lean his massive head against the mesh, and close his eyes while Jonah rubbed the top of his snout. Other times, they just existed in silence. Neighbors gawked, reporters called. One wildlife group even offered to relocate Oscar to a sanctuary, but Jonah refused. "He's not just some animal," he said once. "He's family." In town, people whispered, rolled their eyes, even called him the bear man behind his back. But slowly, something shifted. When a kid got lost hiking, Jonah and Oscar helped the search team find him. When a wildfire threatened the northern edge of the forest, Jonah and Oscar evacuated wildlife long before the officials even showed up. People started waving when they passed him on the road. Some even left bags of apples and salmon at his gate. Not everyone understood, but more than a few started to believe there was something special about that bond. Late one evening, as a storm rolled in, Jonah sat with his back against the wall of the enclosure. Lightning cracked the sky in violent white flashes, and thunder shook the trees. Oscar pressed up against the bars beside him, unafraid, his breath steady. Jonah reached out and rested his hand on the metal. On the other side, Oscar's massive paw met it. For just a second, man and bear, thunder and wind, the whole world quieted. It was a moment Jonah would never forget. The paperwork, the noise, the skeptics, all of it faded over time. Oscar wasn't a project anymore. He was just there, part of the rhythm. Jonah fixed fences, stacked firewood, cooked simple meals, and Oscar, in his way, reminded him to keep going. When Jonah's back hurt, Oscar would rest his head on his lap. When bad memories came, Oscar would huff and paw at the dirt until Jonah smiled. They healed together, not fast, not cleanly, but honestly. One afternoon in late autumn, Jonah noticed something strange. A group of deer had wandered close to the enclosure. Instead of reacting like a predator, Oscar simply watched them. His body stayed calm, eyes soft. The deer paused, stared back, then moved on. That night, Jonah journaled a single line. "He's not who they said he was. Neither am I." The seasons turned, snow blanketed the land, and the woods fell silent. Jonah chopped wood with a rhythm that matched the beating of his heart. When he slipped on the ice and banged his knee, Oscar stood at the edge of the enclosure and made a soft whining noise until Jonah laughed. "I'm okay," he said, limping inside. "Still got work to do." Sometimes Jonah wondered what Oscar dreamed about. Was it the forest? The cages? The faces of people who didn't treat him kindly? Or maybe, just maybe, he dreamed of peace, of sunlight on his fur and the sound of Jonah's voice nearby. Either way, when Oscar woke and saw Jonah, there was always that same huff, gentle, grounding, familiar. And then one night, as the fire crackled and frost kissed the window panes, Jonah stood outside in the snow, watching Oscar sleep. The moonlight turned the bear's fur silver. Everything felt quiet again, sacred, like life had led him here on purpose. Jonah felt something he hadn't felt in years: home.